On a Saturday morning in the 1970s, the sound of cartoon theme songs filled living rooms across America. Children in pajamas sat cross-legged into a plastic ring with a bowl of sugary cereal balanced in their laps. The glow of the television flickering against wood-paneled walls. It was a ritual, simple and reliable, that gave weekends their rhythm. Outside, bikes leaned against porches, waiting for the day's adventures. No helmets, no gadgets, just banana seats and the freedom of open streets. The whole world seemed safe enough for kids to ride until dusk, guided home only by the call of a parent's voice echoing down the block. Clothing often told its own story. A shirt might have been worn by an older brother first, then patched by a mother's careful stitching before being passed down again. Shoes lasted until the solace gave out. Few complained because that was how families stretched every dollar. It wasn't about having the newest or the best. It was about making do with what you had. Those small acts of practicality became part of the fabric of memory, lessons carried quietly into adulthood. Family dinners were the anchor of the day. A roast chicken, a casserole, or maybe just meatloaf with mashed potatoes, whatever it was shared together. The television was switched off, and conversation filled the table instead. Parents asked about school. Children shared stories about playground games, and laughter often carried on long after the plates were cleared. In those moments, even the smallest house felt like the center of the world. Neighborhoods thrived on trust. A front door could be left unlocked without fear. A knock from next door might mean someone was borrowing sugar or flour, or simply stopping by for a chat. Kids cut through backyards on their way to school, and nobody minded. There was an unspoken understanding that everyone was looking out for everyone else. It wasn't just community, it was family, spread across porches and sidewalks, stitched together by countless small interactions that felt ordinary then, but precious now. Life moved at a slower pace. There was no constant buzz of notifications, no endless news cycle pulling people away from the moment. Instead, there were evenings spent on front steps, listening to crickets and watching the sky darken. Radios hummed softly with music. Screen doors slammed as kids ran in and out, and time seemed to stretch further than it does today. The richness of memory came not from having more, but from noticing more the smell of fresh-cut grass, the creak of a swing set, the comfort of routine. Looking back, it's easy to see why those years feel so golden. They weren't perfect, but they were personal. Every detail carried weight, and every day seemed to offer something worth remembering. Yet even as those memories linger warmly, change was already on the horizon. Because as the 1970s rolled on, the little comforts of childhood began to meet the era's obsession with convenience. Before iPads and PlayStations, toys in the 1970s demanded imagination, patience, and sometimes a willingness to risk a bruise or two. They didn't come with screens or apps. They came in cardboard boxes wrapped in bright colors, and once the tape was pulled away, they opened a doorway into a different kind of world. Every toy seemed to carry its own adventure, and often the fun was in making up the rules as you went. Few things lit up a child's face quite like the Easy Bake Oven, powered by nothing more than a light bulb. It turned out tiny cakes that never quite baked evenly, but always felt magical. Kids mixed powders into little trays, slid them inside, and waited with anticipation. The taste didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling that you had created something real, something yours, out of a toy. Then there were the lawn darts, also called jarts. A game that seemed simple. Tossing weighted darts into a plastic ring was, in reality, a recipe for chaos. Parents stood nearby, trusting children to aim carefully, though the results were often less than graceful. Looking back, it's astonishing how dangerous they really were. But at the time, it was just another way to spend an afternoon in the yard, laughing as the darts thudded into the ground, sometimes a little too close for comfort. Some toys worked because they were endlessly repeatable. The Etch-a-Sketch gave kids the power to draw skyscrapers, cars, or mazes with the twist of two little knobs. A Viewmaster, with its clicking reels, transported children into other worlds, national parks, cartoons, even space. And the Sit-and-Spin, a round disc that spun kids in dizzying circles until they collapsed in giggles, became a staple of living rooms and playrooms across the country. Others were unforgettable for their quirks. Stretch Armstrong, the muscle-bound figure filled with goo, could be pulled, twisted, and tied in knots. He always snapped back into shape, at least until the inevitable day when he leaked, leaving behind a sticky mess. The Barbie dream house grew taller each year, filled with pink furniture and endless possibilities for storytelling. And Hot Wheels tracks turned hallways and staircases into racing arenas, where tiny cars zipped, looped, and crashed in endless tournaments. What tied all these toys together was their simplicity. They didn't need batteries, Wi-Fi, or an instruction manual you couldn't understand. They needed kids who were willing to imagine, to pretend, to stretch the boundaries of play far beyond what came in the box. A cardboard fort, a dollhouse, a plastic track weren't just toys. They were worlds waiting to be filled with adventure. Those afternoons of play linger in memory, not because the toys themselves were perfect, but because of the joy they sparked. They were shared with siblings, friends, or sometimes alone in a quiet bedroom, where a toy could become anything you wanted it to be. Of course, toys were only half the fun because the 1970s also had its own unforgettable flavors. From Tang astronauts to Tab soda cans, the 1970s carried a flavor that belonged entirely to its time. Kitchens smelled of casseroles pulled from the oven, powdered drink mixes stirred into pitchers, and fried hamburgers sizzling in pans. Meals weren't fancy, but they were filling, and for most families, they carried a rhythm of comfort that made the ordinary taste extraordinary. Food in those years wasn't about presentation. It was about togetherness, convenience, and a dash of fun. In nearly every refrigerator sat a pitcher of Kool-Aid, its bright red, orange, or purple colors glowing like liquid candy. Mothers stirred in scoops of sugar. Kids dunked long spoons into the mix, and glasses sweated on kitchen tables during long summer afternoons. The tangy sweetness was always there, ready to cool off a game of tag or a sweaty bike ride around the block. Dinners leaned heavily on staples that stretched across several nights. Hamburger Helper, with its powdered packets and boxes of pasta, became a household hero. Tuna casserole baked in Pyrex dishes, topped with crunchy chips or breadcrumbs. Leftovers weren't a burden. They were part of the plan. Meals like these filled stomachs without emptying wallets, and they carried the unmistakable taste of home. Then came Tang, the powdered orange drink marketed as the space-age choice of astronauts. Children believed they were sipping the same fuel that propelled rockets, even if it was just sugar and flavoring. It was less about taste and more about the story. To drink Tang was to join the adventure of the space race, to feel like the world was moving forward in leaps as big as Neil Armstrong's. For adults, soda often meant Tab or Fresca diet drinks in sleek, slim cans that promised something modern and different. For kids, nothing was more satisfying than popping the cap off a glass bottle of Pepsi or Coca-Cola and hearing the fizz erupt. The heavy glass, the cold bite, and the sound of bottles clinking together in a wooden crate created a sensory memory that cans and plastic bottles never quite replaced. School lunches carried their own flavor. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches tucked into brown paper bags, Twinkies or ding-dongs wrapped in shiny foil, and milk cartons that required a careful pinch to open without spilling. Cafeterias buzzed with chatter as kids traded snacks, swapping cookies for chips, or saving treats for the walk home. And then there was fast food, the booming golden arches of McDonald's spreading across towns. A cheeseburger wrapped in paper, fries in a red carton, and a milkshake thicker than any drink from home felt like a special outing. It wasn't yet everyday convenience. It was a treat, a thrill, and for many families, a symbol of something new on the horizon. These tastes and smells linger long after the meals themselves are gone. They remind us not just of what we ate, but of how life felt when families gathered in kitchens, when flavors carried stories, and when even a glass of Kool-Aid could brighten a day. But food was just fuel for the real fun, because growing up in the 70s meant endless ways to play outside. No cell phones. No GPS. Just a bike, a ball, and the whole neighborhood as your playground. In the 1970s, freedom wasn't measured in dollars or possessions. It was measured in how long kids could stay outside before the streetlights flickered on. The outdoors was an endless stage for adventure, with no need for supervision or schedules. A front yard, an empty lot, or a cracked sidewalk could become a world of possibility. Bikes were more than transportation. They were tickets to independence. Children rode in packs, banana seats squeaking as they bounced over curbs, streamers trailing from handlebars, and playing cards clipped to spokes for that satisfying flap-flap sound. The sight of bikes sprawled across a neighbor's lawn was all you needed to know this was where the action was happening. Those rides weren't just about getting from place to place. They were about the feeling of wind rushing against your face, the thrill of a race, and the quiet knowledge that the world felt wide open. Games filled the hours, and the rules were as flexible as the kids playing them. Kick the Can turned ordinary streets into battlefields of stealth. Hide and seek stretched across whole blocks, with kids crouched behind trees or crouching low in tall grass. Hopscotch squares chalked on the sidewalks wore away under bare feet and roller skates, only to be drawn again the next day. The laughter, the shouts, the calls of ready or not echoed through neighborhoods like music. Roller skates were clunky, metal-framed, and strapped onto sneakers with a key. They rattled on uneven sidewalks and wobbled on driveways, but when you found your balance, it felt like flying. Knees scraped, palms skinned, but the joy was worth every bruise. Pools became sanctuaries in the heat of summer, where hours melted away with cannonballs, Marco Polo, and the unmistakable smell of chlorine clinging to skin long after the sun went down. Backyards held their own magic. Treehouses patched together with mismatched boards became secret clubhouses, and forts built from old sheets and lawn chairs stood tall against imaginary armies. These spaces weren't elaborate, but they were sacred. They belonged to the kids who built them, their own tiny kingdoms in a world that still felt safe enough to leave unlocked. Time outside stretched endlessly until, finally, a mother's voice called from a porch, or a father's whistle signaled the end of play. Kids dragged their feet, reluctant to let go of the day's adventures, dirt smudged on their cheeks and hair tangled from the wind. The setting sun marked the end of freedom for the moment, but it also meant another kind of magic was waiting. Because when the games wound down, when bikes were parked and skates unbuckled, the glow of the television flickered to life inside living rooms. And when the sun went down, the real magic happened inside our homes on the glowing TV screens. Before streaming wars, there were only 3 channels, and every family watched the same shows. Television in the 1970s wasn't just background noise. It was the hearth of the home. The set, often a bulky wood-paneled box with knobs you had to twist by hand, commanded living rooms. Families gathered around it like generations before had gathered around radios. And somehow, with so few choices, the entire nation seemed to laugh, cry, and sing along together. Saturday mornings were sacred. Bowls of sugary cereal balanced on laps while kids settled in for hours of cartoons. Scooby-Doo solved mysteries with his gang. The Flintstones took us back to the Stone Age. And Looney Tunes filled screens with slapstick mayhem that parents secretly enjoyed just as much as their kids. Those few hours felt like pure magic, a reward for making it through the school week. By evening, TV brought the family together again. Primetime shows like Happy Days gave us the Fonz with his leather jacket and cool swagger. The Brady Bunch reminded us of the chaos and charm of big families. And All in the Family pushed boundaries by tackling issues that had never been spoken aloud in sitcoms before. These weren't just shows. They were cultural touchstones that sparked dinner-table conversations and inside jokes that still linger today. Daytime belonged to the game shows. The Price is Right taught us to come on down and guess the cost of toasters and cars. Match. Gang delivered cheeky humor and outrageous answers that sometimes made parents shift uncomfortably on the couch. Watching these shows felt like being at a national game, where ordinary people became stars for 15 minutes. And then there were the variety specials, larger-than-life productions that felt like events. The Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour mixed music with comedy skits, and The Carol Burnett Show was a weekly showcase of creativity, laughter, and unforgettable characters. When these shows came on, families tuned in together, not wanting to miss a single moment. Even the commercials became part of the fun. Catchy jingles wormed their way into everyone's memory. Plop, plop, fizz, fizz, or I'd like to buy the world a Coke. These ads weren't just selling products. They were embedding themselves in culture. Kids mimicked them on playgrounds, and parents hummed them in kitchens without realizing it. Of course, getting those shows to come in clearly wasn't always easy. TVs had rabbit ears, those metal antennae perched on top that had to be adjusted just right. Families wrapped them in aluminum foil, twisted them toward the window, and sometimes even had a kid stand nearby, holding one in place to keep the picture clear. When the static finally gave way to a clean signal, it felt like victory. Television in the 70s wasn't just entertainment. It was a shared experience. It raised us, united us, and gave us characters and catchphrases that still echo today. But TV wasn't just entertainment. It shaped the style we wore everywhere we went. From bell-bottoms to mood rings, the 1970s made sure nobody blended in. Fashion wasn't just about clothing. It was a statement. A loud and proud reflection of personality, rebellion, and the colorful spirit of the decade. Walk down any street in those years, and you'd see a parade of styles that were bold, sometimes questionable, but always unforgettable. Bell-bottoms ruled the sidewalks. Jeans flared so wide, they nearly covered your shoes, swishing as kids and teens strutted down hallways or biked to a friend's house. Tie-dye shirts, splashed with every color of the rainbow, announced that individuality mattered more than blending in. And then there were the platform shoes towering solace that added inches to height, but often at the cost of twisted ankles. Looking back, it's amazing how many playground tumbles those shoes caused. Polyester was everywhere. Shiny, stretchy, and often scratchy against the skin, it was sold as the fabric of the future. Kids wore polyester pants to school, parents wore it to parties, and somehow everyone convinced themselves it was cool. Even leisure suits, with their wide lapels and bold colors, became must-haves, especially for dads who wanted to look as smooth as John Travolta under the disco ball. Accessories added the finishing touch. Mood rings promised to reveal your emotions with shifting colors, while peace sign necklaces and fringe vests carried the leftover spirit of the 60s into the new decade. Schoolyards were filled with kids flashing their rings to see who was calm or in love, never questioning the science or lack of it behind the shifting shades. The theater was just as staring as the clothes, the effects less polished, the shag haircut, the impact uneven and layered, was worn by both boys shook the decade girls. Quite like 9 bowl cuts left kids with photo albums they'd rather forget. And then there was the feathered look, made famous by Farrah Fawcett, with flowing waves that required endless brushing and cans of hairspray. Every school had at least one girl who nailed that style, and everyone else secretly wished they could pull it off. Back-to-school shopping was an event in itself. Families piled into Sears or Jack Penny, thumbing through thick catalogs that served as both store and style guide. Kids circled their dream outfits in the pages, hoping their parents would say yes. The glossy photos showed smiling kids in corduroy pants, striped sweaters, and matching sets that looked far more fashionable in print than in real life. Looking back, the fashion of the 1970s was daring, sometimes outrageous, and often impractical. But it reflected the joy of expression, the willingness to take risks, and the fun of being young in a world that seemed open and alive. And when you were dressed to impress, where did you go? Straight to the arcades and music. Drop a needle on the record, and suddenly, the whole house came alive. In the 1970s, music wasn't just background noise. It was the heartbeat of daily life. From living rooms to roller rinks, it set the mood, defined friendships, and shaped memories that still echo today. Vinyl records were treasures. Sliding an album out of its cardboard sleeve, gently placing it on the turntable, and hearing that first crackle before the music began, it was a ritual. The Eagles sang of hotel mysteries, Fleetwood Mac spun stories of love and heartbreak, and the Bee Gees made sure no one could resist the pull of disco. Those records became family heirlooms, played so often that the grooves practically wore thin. Cars carried their own soundtrack, thanks to the clunky but beloved 8-track tapes. Drivers stuffed glove compartments with bulky cartridges, shuffling between rock, soul, and country as they cruised the highways. Sometimes the tape would jam or switch tracks mid-song, but nobody cared. It was magic to have music on the road, blasting through tinny speakers with the windows rolled down. And then there was disco. Under mirrored balls at roller rinks and dance halls, the Bee Gees, Donna Summer, and KC and the Sunshine Band commanded the floor. Roller skates glided in rhythm, bell-bottoms swished in time, and the energy of the music was infectious. Even those who claimed to hate disco found themselves tapping a foot when "Stayin' Alive" came on. Radios were constant companions. AM stations filled mornings with news and talk, while FM stations became the place to hear the latest hits. Teenagers lugged portable radios to parks, beaches, and backyards, turning every gathering into a dance party. DJs were like trusted friends, their voices guiding listeners through the soundtrack of the day. In bedrooms across America, walls were plastered with posters of rock stars and bands. From Led Zeppelin to the Jackson 5, kids stared up at their heroes before falling asleep, dreaming of being on stage with a guitar in hand or a microphone in front of a roaring crowd. Music didn't just entertain. It gave young people an identity, something to hold on to in a world that was rapidly changing. What made the music of the 1970s unforgettable was how personal it felt. Friends bonded over shared favorites, arguing about who was better, the Rolling Stones or the Who. Siblings fought over who got to use the turntable. Parents rolled their eyes at loud rock but secretly hummed along to softer hits. Every song became tied to a memory, a first dance, a road trip, or the simple joy of lying on the floor with headphones, lost in sound. The music of the 70s wasn't just heard, it was lived. And it proved that a decade could be remembered not only by the clothes people wore or the toys they played with, but by the songs that carried them through. But if music filled the air, it was the movies that filled our imaginations. Before CGI and billion-dollar franchises, the 1970s gave us legends that still echo today. It was a decade when the silver screen felt larger than life, when stories seemed to leap off the reel and lodge themselves into the hearts of anyone watching. The theaters might have been smaller, the effects less polished, but the impact was unforgettable. No moment shook the decade quite like 1977, when Star Wars premiered. Audiences walked into the theater not knowing what to expect and walked out changed forever. The opening crawl, the Star Destroyer looming overhead, the hum of lightsabers, it was more than a movie. It was a cultural earthquake, turning kids into Jedi and sparking imaginations that still haven't burned out. 2 years earlier, Jaws had already proven that a film could grip an entire nation. Steven Spielberg's Thriller made people think twice before dipping a toe into the ocean. The suspenseful score alone was enough to raise goosebumps. Suddenly, summer wasn't just about sun and sand. It was about fear, excitement, and the thrill of being scared together in a darkened theater. Then came Rocky in 1976, the ultimate underdog story. Watching Sylvester Stallone's character run through the streets of Philadelphia, pounding the steps of the art museum, made everyone believe that grit and determination could carry you through. The story wasn't flashy, but it was raw, real, and inspiring in a way that still lingers. On the lighter side, Grease brought fantasy and nostalgia together in 1978. With its slick-back hair, catchy songs, and pink jackets, it turned high school into a world of dance numbers and daydreams. For teenagers especially, it was the perfect mix of rebellion, romance, and rhythm. But movies in the 1970s weren't just about what played on the screen. They were about how and where we watched them. Drive-in theaters became social hubs, places where families packed into station wagons with blankets and snacks, or where teenagers tested out their independence. Rows of glowing screens across fields and parking lots created a sense of community, even as everyone focused on the same story unfolding before them. And then there were the matinees. For a couple of dollars, kids could escape into a double feature. The smell of buttered popcorn thick in the air, and paper soda cups sweating in their hands. Popcorn tubs seemed bigger than their heads. Candy bars cost pocket change, and the magic of sitting in the dark with friends made even the simplest films feel grand. These movies and moments didn't just entertain, they defined a generation. They gave kids heroes to look up to, fears to share, and dreams to chase. They shaped how stories would be told for decades to come. But more importantly, they shaped how millions of people remember their youth. And all these memories, music, fashion, movies still live inside us, because the truth is, the 1970s may be gone, but the memories remain like photographs burned into the heart. They live in the laughter of kids chasing each other down sidewalks, in the creak of a screen door on a summer evening, in the glow of a television set that pulls families together. Those moments were never about wealth or status. They were about belonging to the way time seemed to stretch a little longer when the world felt smaller and simpler. There was a kind of innocence in those years, when childhood was shaped not by apps and algorithms, but by scraped knees and secret forts. A single bike could carry you to freedom, a soda pop was a special treat, and Saturday mornings belonged to cartoons and cereal bowls. It didn't take much to make life feel full, because joy was measured in presence, not possessions. What made it special wasn't just the toys, the shows, or the fashions. It was the way people connected. Neighbors leaned on each other, kids grew up in packs, and friendships were built face to face. Long before text messages and video calls, bonds were forged by time spent together. That kind of connection is hard to replicate, and it's why the memories have stayed so vivid. Nostalgia is powerful because it tells us what truly mattered. The 1970s weren't perfect. No decade is, but looking back reminds us that some of the best things in life are timeless. A shared laugh, a favorite song, a story told at the dinner table. These are the threads that stitched a generation together, and they're worth holding on to. Even today, those echoes remain. You see it when an old record spins and the room lights up. You feel it when you stumble across a drive-in still showing movies under the stars. You hear it in the jingle of an ice cream truck rolling through a neighborhood. The world has changed, but Main Street never really left. It lives on in memory, and in the places and traditions we choose to keep alive. So perhaps that's the real gift of remembering. It's not about clinging to the past. It's about carrying forward what was best in it. The innocence, the joy, the sense of community. The knowledge that what we shared made us who we are. And that's why the memories of the 1970s still bring people together. They not just stories from another time. They reminders of the values that matter most. Connection, simplicity, and belonging. What do you remember most from the 1970s? Drop it in the comments below and let the memories keep flowing, because in sharing them, Main Street lives on.